Hello. Oh, I'm so sorry, Matt. You take it. My bad. My bad.
No, it's fine. You clearly have an agenda here, Jeremy, so you could do the intro.
No,
I just
no,
did it the
no, no.
first time.
You got it. You got it. I honestly
Are you
forgot who did
sure?
the intro. Yeah. You got it. I believe in you.
All right. So I'm Matt, got Jaeger Eriksen. Joining me, as he always has and hopefully always will, is Jeremy Spoons Byle. And here to talk all things esports. It's demon time.
Demon time. Everyone in chat, we were talking about it 5 minutes ago. What are you, purple grapes or green grapes fans? I was munching on some grapes before this, and Matt and I were talking about it, and I hate purple grapes.
I feel like it's one of those things where it's like averages versus like peak and lowest performance. Like the best purple grapes are better than the best green grapes, but like you can have some really bad purple grapes, whereas like green grapes are like a very solid like 6 or 7 out of 10 performer each and every time. I feel like that's what I've noticed. I think a lot of fruits like that. Like mangoes, the best mangoes are probably like the best fruit I've ever had. But that was like in actual locations that grew mangoes versus like when you get one in like a supermarket it's not it.
You know, my main goal is to blow up and then act like I don't know nobody. Okay, whatever. So today, uh, today, today we got some pretty interesting topics. We're gonna be talking about just structure of an esports team with like coaches, players, all that fun stuff. You know, right, Matt?
Yes, the most fun things. Yeah, so I think like this is something like that's like in my bag that I always like in a soapbox about is structuring, because I feel like with esports we have a lack of structure, which is nothing new to say. But I think the most structured sport and like probably one of the most global sports is what we call soccer here in the US, or is football for everyone else. And that has all the way from your youth teams, you're playing on different club teams or school teams in the US, like all the way throughout your entire career. You always have coaching from the moment you start, and you're always playing, in a structured environment. Obviously, you do have like your local games where you kind of pick up stuff. But you also always have, like, if you want it, there's always accessible community. And whereas esports, like, you start purely only in the pickup community environment, and you have like no structure of how to function with other players in a sense. Because I think another thing that amplifies it is the solo queue thing, where it's not you're not playing with the same group of players every week, at your local spot or local court. So you have to have like some level of respect amongst you. You're playing with new people every time in esports, so like you're held to no social standard of behavior or conduct. So everyone ends up playing a lot more selfishly because it's like there's no reason for you to pass the ball to someone because you're not going to see them ever again, in the metaphor, as it were.
Yeah, I guess, I didn't expect a comparison to soccer. I feel so many people, when they look at esports, they don't compare it to like a traditional sport because of it being, still very new. Like, it's been around for like 20 years with like CS, Half-Life, Halo, and like games like that. And so I think it's really interesting when you go to the point of comparing it to traditional sport, since there's a lot, like we were talking about last week a little bit, those like negative stigmas that are around gaming. People like look past it, but I think like the structure of the team is almost something that is kind of looked over. At least in like if you're in the pro scene, that's very different. But at least in like collegiate, high school, bubble teams, things like that, I feel the structure is something that definitely kind of lacks from team to team.
Yeah, it definitely does because it ends up, at least in my personal experience and a lot of other people I've talked to, each person who ends up in a leadership position in an esports program is having to build it from the ground up. You're not inheriting the structure of someone else. You're having to completely build something from the ground up. So, whereas like a lot of other programs you're inheriting or you're kind of building on the knowledge of someone else, because I think that's what we're slowly going to start seeing in esports is because sports has like the classic, or any field really has the classic kind of evolution of someone where it's like, okay, you're a young prospect or whatever, just getting into something. You have your kind of standard career or mainstay of something, and then you kind of usually take more of a step back and go into more of that mentorship role, especially in sports, and you become maybe coaching staff or support staff. But in esports, since it's not been around that long, we don't have that kind of giant backlog of former players and former, interested people who have been in the space for a long time and who have that kind of mixture of both life experience and technical game experience to kind of be that teachers. There is no kind of elder statesman in the space at all. So everyone's having to kind of teach themselves from the ground up, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just try to like, scour the internet of like, okay, how do I run tactics in my game? What is a practice schedule that I should run that's effective for my game? Because, every sport's going to have different levels of conditioning, drills that you might run, like all these concepts, like, again, sometimes it's a new game like Valorant, where it's like this game just gets developed and then people are start interested in it. It's like, okay, do we just copy the stuff that CSGO players are doing? Is that going to be an effective routine for this game? Or do we have to develop our own new, tactics? How do defaults work? How does map control work? All those specifics of the game are because new sports are in a way are being developed all the time in esports. And to your point earlier, I think with the difficulties, it's also you having to like teach out or like remove the pug mindset and the pickup games mindset from players. Like, not only like are you having to create the structure, you have to like remove the biases and tell people how to become a team player and not just play selfishly all the time. Because the 5 players or 6 players, the 3 players, Rocket League, Overwatch, and Counter Strike, respectively, you need to have a different structure for each of those. And you can't all be playing selfishly. You have to play supportive, and sometimes those roles will flex around like they would in any activity. But you have to understand when to. It's a give and take relationship.
Right. And like those mindsets, I don't know what your experience has been with CS, but I feel a lot of people when they come from like either a casual scene or even like some of like competitive with gaming, it's so hard to like build that discipline. Like when I look at when I run cross country, like there's a certain level of discipline and respect you have for like other players and coaches that I don't necessarily see on that esports level because like gaming, most people think of, oh, it's this fun activity. Like I got introduced to, like for me when I was like 4 or 5, something like that, and it's just like it did it, I guess, recreationally through like elementary school, middle school, high school, and then you get to the point of competitiveness, and it's like establishing the balance of when to like have that casual play and competitive. It's almost difficult to be able to get that. I don't know if that's how it's been for you. For me, I've had a very difficult experience with players as far as trying to get them to realize this is like a competitive team, or like in our case, D1 competitive esports team.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree on all fronts with that essentially, and that it's you games are both kind of a leisure activity and end up being competitive, and a lot of times like players on a team, like say a college team, will also have like separate friends. Maybe they go to a different school and they'll play those pickup games, and it's like, are those practice? Are those leisure activities for them? And what constitutes practice, and how much practice do you need to schedule? Because again, in esports, it's a muddy waters of who's getting scholarships. How are we building student engagement? Like, what are the rules of all these different people? And so when you're on a team, especially in like a leadership position, trying to structure it, it's like you have to have those conversations with players. Like, okay, how much are we practicing? Like, what are our goals for this team, for this group of players? Like, what do we think is achievable, or like what do we all want to pursue together? And understand that, okay, you might have to like not play other games even. That's another thing, because like if gaming is like your relaxation, or what you normally would consider relaxation, like it's like, okay, you might have to put, if you're a Valorant player, an Overwatch player, you might have to put Apex on the back burner. If you're an Apex player, you couldn't maybe not play that much Valorant, or don't play that much Rocket League. And you just have to focus in on your game. Like, it's not to say that you can maybe never play those games, but if you're, say your performance isn't doing that well in your main game, and you're logging 20 hours a week on a side game, it's like, okay, you have to kind of have that realization. Or if you're in a leadership position in a team, that is something you ultimately have to have with that individual player. And from my personal experience, I think that's, again, very difficult. Like, there's no easy secret to having like difficult conversations with someone, whether like, especially when someone's like what you consider underperforming, or feeling like they're out of place on the team, because everyone responds to stuff differently in terms of criticism and in terms of like positive reinforcement in a strange way. Because there's definitely people that almost like that you need to be very harsh on, like, and that's what will like completely motivate them, and and you just got to lay it out. And sometimes you have to like really be very delicate, and try to just be very supportive, and like, because a lot of times players obviously kind of do know when you're struggling, because a lot of games make it very plain if you're not performing the best.
Right. And the thing that, as far as like noticing on players how I as performance, the hard thing is like I've had conversations with different players about like if they actually want to be competitive, or like they're just doing it for fun. Because some people think that it's like, I'm just gonna play the game and I'm gonna get better just by playing the game, which I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, you will get better. But when you're trying to compete against teams that are always getting better, that are going through, like, look at a team like USF, for example, for like Rocket League. They're probably one of the best teams in the nation right now. I don't know how accurate that'll be, so don't quote me on that, but they're one of the like better teams in the nation, and they're grinding like crazy. I mean, they do have like full-time coaches, things like that. But it's like the players truly want to be there, and I've had conversations with players where they're like, "Yeah, I wanna play competitively. I really want to do it," and then they're not putting in the work, and they're just like going into just playing competitive, and it's like it's hard when your players tell you they want to be competitive, but they're not like showing that same thing. So it's like that level of discipline that's not there, because it's like, oh, gaming fun, I want to have fun, which I mean, by all means, but it's like different when it's a team setting.
Yeah, I think that's like a lot of different things you brought up there. I think it's like one of the most frustrating things in talking with esports, teammates, is like, or just any competitive environment for that matter, is that if there's any sort of disconnect between words and actions, like, oh, I want to be an elite competitive player, and it's like, are you taking the steps that will get you to being an elite level player?
Right.
Because that, is a very specific, set of circumstances that's going to be that. And I think from just the kind of queuing up, just playing matchmake in any respective game, I think ultimately I think of it as kind of plateaus, and same thing with the support, outside support as well for a particular program. Like any given group of, and either an individual or a group of players is going to have a certain level that they can hit naturally, essentially. So one player just playing as much competitive as they feel like, I guess, is going to kind of settle into a very natural skill level for themselves. Like some players will be a grand champ, challenger, radiant, etc. high level players. Some will be kind of middle table players. Some will be a very poor player. And that's just kind of what the quote unquote natural state would be for that player. But then there's the sidebar, which is like having a mindset for specific improvement, for specific goals, and actually trying to hone different parts of their craft. So that is like, okay, my crosshair placement, I need to just obsess over that. I'm going to do pre-fire maps. So I'm going to just do death matches where I only focus on crosshair placement and I don't flick. I just move and keep my crosshair stable, and so on. And so I'll watch demos or learn more utility and lineups for my abilities, or I'm going to work on positioning. I'm going to work on movement, so on and so forth. I'll use practice tool to practice my combos in League, whatever it ends up being. But there's a very different level you can hit with that personal improvement mindset of personal goals. And something we might get into later in the podcast, there's also the mindset, the mental strength that you can definitely improve a lot. And that is as a huge depth to where that goes. And it's a very, I feel like, underutilized portion as well. But that's also where coaches and stuff comes in. Because as one individual, you only have insight into so many different areas of your own game, and you will only have so many solutions that you've thought of to solving those problems. So it's like, my aim sucks, I'm going to do more deathmatch. It's like, maybe you shouldn't just do endless deathmatch. Maybe you need to do certain aim maps, or you do a Kovacs, or you do an aim labs, or any of the different aim trainers that are out there. And those might actually be a better solution to what your problems are with clicking heads, as it were. And that's where coaches can come in and help bring additional insight to your game. Or if it's a team problem, like, okay, why are we not syncing up on different things? That's where a head coach might, bring a lot of things. Or there could be very specific assets, like a post plant in Counter-Strike. I know is a big issue for a lot of teams sometimes. If you can get into a winning situation but just not close out rounds, and that's definitely like a very frustrating place, because it's not even that you're doing necessarily, like, you're just getting blown out. It's like, we're so close, but why are we not closing things out? And that's also where mental coaches again come in, back to that kind of mental aspect. So I think, and even same thing with money and financial support for the teams, because that's more hours that you can put in, because you're going maybe from a 15 to 20 hour a week gamer to a 35 hour a week gamer suddenly, because you can just quit your part-time job or your full-time job even,
Right.
and just focus solely on esports.
And that one's really hard to do. I know we're talking about, like, with some event planning I've been working on, it's like asking, these players already have big enough time commitments on their own. I mean, a lot of them. I mean, look at Breezy, for example. He works full-time, or basically full-time. Well, I forget where he's at. But at his job, on top of being, a prominent figure for the CS community, and then it's like whatever else he does, and it's like being able to take a team, obviously, like, the DePaul's team is at a pretty competitive level, but being able to hit, like, the next level, which is, like, elite play, like, you have to ask so much out of the players. And if everyone's not on the same page, you can't really move past any goal. And so I may be wrong about that with CS, so I mean, by all means stop me, but at least as far as with Rocket League, when I was involved with the org, it became very difficult because everyone we had an ultimate goal of, yeah, we want to win, we want to compete, things like that. But then it was like everyone had their own different path of getting to it, and there was communication with it. But because of, we didn't have as much time as probably we needed to be able to hit that point, it just that path became muddled. So everyone's mindsets were, I guess, like, everywhere. and it's hard to get everyone back in line when, like you're saying, there's no like professional coach or professional, I don't even know what to call it, like a mental coach, not a therapist or counselor, but like, um, yeah, that. So I don't know. It's just so difficult to be able to figure out. Like, and there's no formula to get to it either. It's not like, okay, the teams you're gonna have it like with like hockey, for example. You may, or I guess I'll talk about cross country because I don't know anything about hockey. I know you like hockey. But with like in the season, the coach will put together like, let's say a 12 to 14 week training plan, at least with my coach, and then it was like, oh, this is where we want to be at each point, and it's pretty easy if you put in the work. But with esports, it's like you can put in that work, but I mean you could still have 30 million things you have to work on.
Yeah, I would say from my traditional esports background, it's always been interesting structuring team practice, and that was actually something I felt like I was a bit weaker at, because I was a goaltender always, and so that was a lot of individual work all the time. Your job is sit in the crease, do you stop pucks or balls from passing you, and that's your job. It's pretty cut and dry. So yeah, I'm not necessarily one to speak as much to the perfection of a team structure, but speaking to what you said with CS, I think that's definitely something our teams run into, because our first goal was to get approved by the university, which is an issue you sometimes run into with M games, or even Counter-Strike being an older esports title. It's not new and exciting like something like Valorant necessarily is. It's been around for 20 years in various iterations. So ultimately, we got that hurdle done. That was kind of last year, to some degree. And so that was really exciting. And we also became, again, we were just rebuilding the team because the other former varsity team became Valorant players, which is, again, their personal choice.
Yeah.
But we had an entire former JV roster suddenly kind of get promoted and have to kind of adjust to that. And again, we kind of made a goal of playoffs, and we achieved that in the Face It season. And then this year has been kind of wanting to improve upon those results, is basically be better than last year's team,
Gotcha.
essentially, which is ultimately difficult because we were a pretty good team, because that core of people, myself, Jay, Noah, Breezy, and Chris, I guess 4 of us had played together for 2 years about at that point. And then we basically had added Chris as an extra. So in some form, we had a very solid core group of players that had played together for a very long time. And so to kind of catch up to that chemistry, it can be difficult. We obviously had a lot of talented players in the roster regardless. And now that I've stepped down, it's been a different thing, because before it was kind of like, okay, how is my system, working with these new players? And now it's kind of like, okay, what are this whole new group of people like trying to build a system that's better than my system, essentially. They want to see overall improvement in the team. Or if maybe the system isn't quite as good, they're still finding enough effective individual play and communication and chemistry that they can kind of make up for any lack of whatever I might have brought to the team in that respect. But it is difficult because you want to keep on taking the steps to the next level, but it is difficult to kind of endlessly pour more time into this program, essentially. And advice with it, I think, is kind of just keeping the goals like concrete, and like you said, where it's like you actually lay out kind of a plan for what you're going to do, what you're going to improve. And to speak to the specific example of Counter-Strike, it's a lot of times you're talking map pool, essentially. It's like, okay, what tactics are we going to be running? What tactics are we going to be learning? What is our setups going to be? Because sometimes things can feel stale if you keep on doing them over and over again. Right. So sometimes small switches and adding little extra things can add a lot. And also finding quality scrim and practice, because that's another thing, is finding the balance, because I think you need to have all 3 levels to feel good. You need to have practices where you're performing like you're dominating your opponent, because that's where you really feel improved, when you're able to just stomp an opponent, essentially, or convincingly beat them. That's a really good feeling, because again, that's like, okay, we've cleared a hurdle where it's like we can no questions asked, we can beat a team of a certain level. And then you have those teams where it's like you're very evenly matched, essentially, where they'll sometimes get the edge on you, sometimes you'll get the edge on them. And that's probably what should be the bulk of your practice, unsurprisingly. is trying to and that will be a slow increase. It's like, okay, we have to battle stronger and stronger opponents in that. And then obviously sometimes you need to face the highest level of competition that you can find for yourself. So that's going to be, in the case of Counter-Strike, signing up for more open and money, like cash cup type things, where you will run into minor league pro teams because the Counter-Strike circuit is so open that you can just run into those players that are professionals, and they will convincingly beat you because you are college players at that point. Yeah, and that's just the reality of it. And that's a very important thing because that kind of humbles you, and it can be that kind of ego check, and helps you kind of hopefully relight that fire to kind of see, okay, what are they doing or not doing, and how do we reach that level. But if you're just constantly playing people that are so much better than you, it can just feel like a giant chasm is opening up because it is no fun. Because sometimes I will say, like, psychologically, it can be difficult that you can just kind of give up on a particular game or a scrim when you are like nothing that you seem to do works at all or makes any difference in how the outcome of a round goes. That's what you want to avoid, is that kind of like psychological dead zone, essentially, from that practice. So it definitely is difficult to kind of structure practice, but I feel like if you kind of keep that in mind, where it's like you have to understand that there's a lot of different levels and try to network. Like, life's always about who you know, as it were, but it's good to have a variety of scrim partners too, because you don't want to just like meta game against each other, because if you just keep on playing back and forth a million times, like, you're going to develop a lot of bad habits as well that are just specialized, like, oh, this player always does this thing, like that's not going to help you again when you're playing some random opponent. Because also at the low level of esports, that collegiate, or the lower level, as it were, of collegiate esports, you're going to be playing against a lot of very, very random opponents who have a very, very different idea of what their game plan is and what they'll like approach. And you have to kind of meet them there, because it's the classic quote of, a amateur swordsman can kill a master by doing something that the master might have not even ever considered. And you'll see that with, streamers playing, smurfing or whatever. They'll just be like, I had no idea this guy was going to stand in this corner or do this play or run through this smoke or do this utterly stupid thing, but it worked in some way because it was so unexpected. And that's something you have to be prepared for in collegiate esports, because you're going to be playing of people at a lot of different levels. It's not the pro scene where everyone's filtered out at that point and never is going to do those ridiculously like stupid things. You're going to face random people at that point.
I feel that makes it kind of difficult, especially you brought up like the point of the mental blocks. When you're at that point where you're scrutinizing yourself so much, especially the more and more competitive you get, you make less mistakes. So you're looking at like the tiniest thing, like, oh, I should have placed, or I guess on like Rocket League, oh, I should have turned right instead of left, and it would have let me get to X position this much faster. And so like, I think that's funny you bring up the playing people who are like technically worse than you, because I swear every time like that would happen to me, there'd be things where I'm like, how did that like, who does that? Like, no one goes for that. So it doesn't help as well, especially finding scrims. There's no like centralized hub to kind of do it. It's just kind of like you're saying, who you know, and it's like, oh, if you find someone's Discord, reaching out to them. Half the time, if it's a random team, they may not necessarily care to scrim against you. So it's like, there's so much work on top of like the team structures that has to be put in, that you also have to put into work, like finding scrims and then setting up practices. And when most of these players is like, the team's just an extracurricular activity. It's not like every single org in the US, as far as colleges go, offer scholarships. There's only so much you can expect out of players. And, obviously there are people who go above and beyond and they're amazing, but you can't expect everyone to be at that level.
And we kind of discussed this last week. It's that you must go above and beyond to kind of then get that level of support. It's like, oh, if you're
Right.
a championship winning roster for many, many years in a row, suddenly then they're like, okay, now we'll like give you some support of a like, oh, you're actually our team. We'll give you a budget. It's like, we just are winning championships. Like, you can credit our league team. They're, I think, 3 or 4 time champions now of Big East, and it's like, again, I'm not saying we have like our league team has as many fans as the men's basketball team. I would never say that at this point. but it's like you should give them a bigger piece of the pie at a certain point, like especially let's say
Yeah.
relative to other community engagement things. Like there's some of those like office of student involvement things, and we're technically in that obviously, that I feel like at our respective college, aren't as engaging as esports is, and it's like yet they're receiving more funding. So it's like again, I feel like relative to your talent and your engagement, that's where your financial payout should essentially be at.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I mean it's weird that our esports teams are pretty good. Like League, like you said, they've won 3 or 4 Big East championships, and CS is definitely now that it's like officially recognized, and you have like budgets to be able to participate in like FACEIT and ESEA. That like all the teams are getting all this competition, but specifically in DePaul, I don't mean to bag on them too much, but you don't really hear much about esports other than from esports specifically.
yeah, and I think that's ultimately like the goal of what we mentioned before, like this podcast, and what we're trying to eventually do with social media, and is trying to reach out more essentially and kind of do a lot more crossovers, because I think there's a lot of smaller groups in DePaul. I think like some of the student journalist stuff, like they want to connect with students more and be, like, there's always more people you can reach with, the student newspaper and the student shows and all that kind of stuff. Like, because no one wants to see their content die on the vine because you put a lot of heart and soul in it. There's a lot of game designers who've made a lot of games, a lot of writers who've created a lot of scripts and things, and no one wants to, ever, that's why everyone's, doing the things they do is they do it both for the love of what they do, but everyone also enjoys seeing other people, thrive and succeed.
Right.
A lot of people are fans of pro sports or pro esports and stuff. They, it's both that you want to express yourself and also kind of consume content in the same vein. So yeah, it's definitely a difficult space to navigate as we kind of continue to have these conversations. And there's no clear answer, but I think to kind of bring it back to a little bit of a lighter side on structuring esports teams is that like definitely talk to people, like always just have conversations with your fellow teammates, like if you're someone who's interested in your team, like talk to whoever's been there before. It's like, okay, what did you guys do to make the team? Like whoever's like the graduating classes, you're an incoming freshman, like just pick their brain about stuff, because you'd be surprised how much you can learn from like a 2-hour conversation. Just one conversation with someone can really open up your mind, because the biggest thing I found is not always like that you always need a step-by-step plan, because there's not a lot of there's not a lot of step-by-step plans out there, and two, if you're truly following a step-by-step plan, that's not going to make you adaptable, because your situation is always going to be different than the advice that you're given. But the best kind of advice is the stuff that gives you a toolbox and the language that you can use to understand and to ask your own questions. Because if you're talking to your teammate's former IGL, your former team captain, and he's talking to you about how the team is structured, how the roles work, who's a tank, or who's a support player, or who's an entry fragger, who's the the offer, for instance, at a very basic level, to try to make this example hopefully start to click with people. Once you have that basic vocab, maybe you get some deeper vocab and you start to research. Use Google and use YouTube. The internet is a massive archive, and it is so massive that it is very difficult to find the best stuff through sifting through the noise. But if you follow the rabbit hole, like it's just like music, like in my experience, where it's like if you find a song you like, don't just necessarily find the artist. Like there is that artist, but their artist is going to have a lot of content or a lot of different songs that they make. So you might want to start with that album. Is there other songs on that album that sound the same? Okay, maybe there isn't. You're like, why is that? You might also look at the producer. If it's a hip hop song, that producer might be the one who actually has that sound. And then you'd be like, great, I found the producer. They have tons of like a very distinct sound. It's amazing. It's like, well, but they only have like 5 songs that sound that way. It's like, well, who was that producer inspired by? Then you can go a step further and find who that producer was inspired by. And the same thing applies to esports, if you kind of know what I'm talking about, where you can find certain IGLs who run a certain tactical system. And it's like, who were they on a team with before, if you're trying to learn more new tactics and new minds to understand further tactical and leadership concepts and skill concepts to apply to your games.
I think that brings up the idea that communication is so important. I mean, this is across all fields of life, but specifically in esports, just talking to people and you just gather so much information. I mean, when I was playing Rocket League, I was always like asking people who are better than me, like it didn't even have to be something like specifically related to my own gameplay, like exactly like what they may be doing, and then trying to implement that into my gameplay. So it's like having a bunch of ideologies just come together and different philosophies kind of allow you to come to your own conclusions. Because specifically in esports, I feel not a lot of people, unless you're a coach, have like very like what's the word? I guess like I don't know if driven is the right word, but like an opinion that like they're like, oh, this is the right way, this is the only way. Um, Very few people are like that, and so when you talk to people, you'll just have a lot of like very open opinions, and it's really easy to build off of one another. It's like a bunch of building blocks that there's always room for like more growth.
Yeah, there always is. And I think you bring up an excellent point. It's that every player has like basically their own methodology, because that's the plus side, is that like there's no, oh, you're learning route one football, or you're running a dump and chase, like, or there's very certain like styles that you're like, there's no like paradigm that you have to necessarily conform to. Each player from the ground up kind of constructed their own worldview of how they approach the game. And so each conversation you have, if you're willing to kind of, if you're someone who does have like a I'm right, you're wrong opinion to the game, if you just take a step back and kind of humble yourself, or even just are willing to listen and not just immediately correct people and immediately be like, no, you should be doing this. If you're just willing to kind of quiet that part of your mind and just fully like listen and not focus on what you're going to say next or anything, just let that person fully explore their ideas and why they have arrived at the decisions they've made in their gameplay, it can be very enlightening, because there's a lot of like aspects, like in 9 out of 10 areas of a particular player, you might be better than them, but they might have that one aspect that they have some unique perspective to, or a unique way of thinking that can add something to your game. Or even in like, you might have some area of your game that you're unconsciously very good at, and you see someone else and you're like, and they talk to you and you're like, I don't really agree with how they approach these situations, but you don't know why. Because sometimes it can be very useful to have a conscious awareness of how you play and approach situations. Obviously, when you're performing at the highest level, it is unconscious and should be instinctual. But if you're ever trying to explain to someone how to improve and to actually be a coach, coming back to the structure example, there's a classic phenomenon you see where elite players often make horrible coaches. Like, you see Wayne Gretzky coach someone and he doesn't impart very good advice to them.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
because he is operating at such a high level that it's purely instinct. Same thing with Michael Jordan. Like, he's not a good basketball coach because he's just like, why don't you just come in from the free throw line and dunk? It's like, well, I'm not as athletic as you, Michael Jordan, so that's not going to work. So if you can, even if you are someone who's unconsciously skilled at something, if you can then, in addition, develop that unconscious or that conscious understanding from even conversations with players worse than you, you can start to understand their aspect and understand how to utilize them. This is probably oversighted by esports players at this point, but you see in documentaries like The Last Dance most recently, that in order to build a championship team, you need to understand that some players are better than others. Like, that is just going to be a fact of life. It doesn't mean those players are useless or not important to the overall success of the team, but you also have to understand that they're operating by a different standard and they are playing a different role than, for instance, your star player is going to do. But you need to have a productive relationship amongst all those different players and have those conversations about why are you approaching the game the way you are. And again, having that appreciation, it's like, okay, they're a worse player than me, but they're operating actually in a very efficient way. They're doing their job at a very high level, and that's all they need to do. And I can just let them do their role and, for instance, let the coaching staff handle that criticism rather than myself constantly barking at them in game.
and not a lot of players, I feel, are equipped. I don't want to say not a lot of players are like good or bad at something, but I feel not a lot of people have the tools to be able to, I guess, handle criticism and those like negative mindsets and whatever it may be that's like I guess imposing like harm onto the brain or the psyche. So it's like difficult, especially when you look at like these collegiate teams, because there just aren't enough people to be able to disperse it. Like someone like yourself, Matt, when you were on CS, it was like, oh, you're the IGL. Oh, you're also doing leadership. Oh, now you're looking at like graduating as well, and it's like you've all of these different aspects of life and gaming, and it's like sometimes there isn't necessarily, I guess, healthy ways of dealing with these different criticisms, which I don't know if it's like, I don't think it planned is the right way to look at it, but you know, in the situation we're in, it just kind of happens.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of people are kind of end up being the cornerstones of various groups, and then they leave, and then it's like all comes tumbling down, and then everyone's picking up the rubble, and there's not this like smooth transition from one person passing the power and the leadership and the knowledge to the next person and the next person. So you have this like wonderful growth of structure. I mean, even myself, I'm guilty of this because initially my goal had been to last year um, to essentially step back and coach. That had been my transition because I was an IGL for 2 years and I wanted to be a coach for 1 year, and then I would have my senior year, this current year, to just focus on graduating and my studies and so on and so forth. However, due to kind of roster mania and Valorant being released, we had a big team shakeup and among other different things as well. So I needed to step into the role of an active player again. So I continued playing, and then it hit that kind of deadline of this towards the end of my senior year, and it kind of hit a point where it's like I am doing a lot for the team, and it was overall like a very good experience, and I earned a lot from it. But what it was ultimately a burden. Like everything in life that you commit to takes time and energy. The best things in life do. But so I reached a point where it's like, okay, I do have to step back from this program and this role. But it was very disappointing that like I ultimately couldn't commit to like full-time coaching and actually like my DMs are open to all the players, and I do have conversations or occasionally step in to coach a match or a LAN here and there. But it's not really, I'm not able to consistently step in and like teach them all the things that I learned in order to have like a very smooth transition for someone to kind of take my shoes really naturally. Because I think a lot of times esports are always in this damage control mode. You're never like able to build for the future really, which I think is really disappointing. And I think in any program that you need to kind of try to escape the damage control mindset and build things for the future. And one of the easiest ways I think is to write stuff down. Like as simple as it is write down the process, like the processes that you did, the videos you watched, the things that you read, and then that should be a repository for anyone who wants to step into your footsteps, into your shoes. The sad thing is a lot of people don't take the initiative to consume all the resources that are out there, because there's basically unlimited knowledge. You just have to reach out and grab it. But I mean, it is intimidating and exhausting to constantly seek more knowledge to improve your craft, whatever it might be in life. But you'll find that even 5 minutes of like dedicated improvement at something daily is more than enough to kind of leapfrog you, or just massively like you kind of do your tread water stuff, your stuff that keeps you going, and you just add that extra 5 minutes that's towards the future. You'd be surprised what happens.
Manifesting? I don't want to cut you off, but manifesting things is so big, so big. I literally have, like, on the side, I got this whole whiteboard thing with, like, things I have to do, and, I feel not a lot of people, like, it's literally the smallest things help out so much. I remember my brother sent me a picture, because at home I have another whiteboard next to my desk, and it had, like, things I needed to, or wanted to improve on with Rocket League, and then also, O-Fish got me into Project M, and I had all these like below Rocket League stuff, like different melee mechanics. And my brother took a picture. He was like, "Oh, is this what it takes to be a pro Rocket League player?" And yeah, that, I guess that's besides the point. But I just think like putting it on like physically, like having it here on this like whiteboard, it forces me to follow through, because I'm really bad at like saying I'm gonna do something and half the time I don't do it. So I don't know. It's like really, it doesn't even matter what it is. Like I remember I did a um this like activity at the beginning of the school year with some of my other coworkers, and it was like we got these rocks and we put a word on it for things that we felt, and I have hope on it, and like manifesting like hope, like just the best of things. I don't know. It just this is like a little um superstitious, I guess, but I'm just like having it here. I'm like, it's gonna happen now. I'm gonna make sure it happens. So I don't know. That's my rant for today. Manifesting is good, but specifically in esports, it just is like it helps you stay on pace. It's very easy to fall behind when you're competing, just because a lot of the times you're practicing from your home. Like I literally sleep like over there, so it's like when you can literally get up and just hop on at any point in the day, and like if you're tired you can hop on, if you're sick you can hop on. It's not like with sports where you're almost limited to how much you can perform or how much you can like play.
Yeah, exactly. If your knees are going to give out at some certain point if you
Yeah.
keep running endlessly, you will physically collapse. Whereas esports, like, I mean, your wrist might start hurting, but it's a lot. You can ultimately like have that push mentality. You can push a lot farther in esports, and like you can put in a lot of very, very unproductive hours, and those boundaries are very hard to develop. And I would also speak to a lot of people. That was something I tried to also establish on the team, was like trying to push for more healthy routines. Like, you can have late night hours. That's a lot. I mean, a lot of times practices have to be nights because people work and have class, but you also have to say, like, okay, it's like you don't need to play 7 games every single day. Like, some players play too much or it becomes unproductive, or their mentality is so gone, then they keep playing when the mentality's gone. Whereas if they took 20 minutes to reset themselves, they would have much more productive practice. So, because it's fine to work very hard and put a lot of hours in, but if you're putting those hours in mindlessly, or not even mindlessly, but you're not approaching them in the right way, you can kind of really be counterproductive to yourself. Um, in addition, like, I feel as though, how would I say this? I think, yeah, the manifesting point is, is good, and it's ultimately like everyone is going to learn in different ways, or like have a different system that works for them, and that's just the fact of life. But it's also understanding how to take what's useful from someone else. Like, okay, they're doing this, I like this, I can transform it in my own way and use it in this way, and just discard what's not useful. It's like, if someone you look up to as a player does a lot of things, but like, say you like their play style, but their game settings are whack, don't use their game settings. Like, you don't have to like perfectly like this, config is God. Like, I am never going to play on like 720p resolution. Like, I'm sorry, he's crazy at the game. I'm never gonna deny that, but like, I'm not staring at 720 pixels black bars on my screen in my life, like, ever. Like, I tried it and I was just like disgusted. Like, I threw up when I played that way. So you don't have to perfectly idolize those players. And it's also like, it's the simple, like, a lot of times in esports, since it's this kind of chaotic world, it's just like, step up to the plate and just do it. Like, ask for forgiveness afterwards. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think most people have a general sense of like what's out of bounds. Because again, it's like, if it's like a team structure and you're just like, hey guys, let's warm up together for 30 minutes and then like scrim for 2 hours on ESEA. Shout out ESEA for having scrim hosting. Because like you said, there's not a lot of people that have scrim hosting, and Lord knows at least ESEA has it. It's keeping the platform alive, single-handedly. But like, just the most simple structure is better than just us showing on and be like, we'll do whatever. It's like, again, like, if it's a void, step up. Like, again, you don't have to be the world's greatest leader or captain, but just show up and try your best, and then like, ask questions, like, and take feedback. Like, hey, you can message people personally. And that's another thing I would say is understanding both the public facing role and the private facing role of being a leader when you're structuring an esports program or an esports team. You need to present yourself and act a certain way and have certain conversations when you're in a group setting, but you also need to have truly private conversations, whether that's in DMs, calls, or even like reach out to individual players and like have lunch with them and just them, because people are social. Like you're going to have a different personality, a different perception of someone, and different words that will they'll come out of their mouth in different settings. Like when you're alone in a coffee shop with someone, grabbing a bite like a bagel and a coffee, you're going to have a very different conversation with them when you're on like a Discord server in the team practice and a warm up before a match. Like you're going to have two very
Right.
different people there. And those are both important to hit. Like you need to be a leader and structure and bring those things and know your role, even if you're not the leader, if you're a support guy in the team or a glue guy. You need to understand that role in the public setting, but also understand the private relationships you're going to have with each of your teammates, because I think those are also very much underutilized, because you're always in this like 5-person or 20-person even Discord call, and it's like you need to also take the time to have personal relationships with people, and that's going to be different than your public relationship.
And building that rapport, it allows you to be able to, as long, or not as long as, also having like the different perspectives, it allows you to kind of, it's like a different relationship almost. I know with my experiences, it's like, when people see me in Discord servers and like online, I'm very loud, like both personality and volume wise. But then when you get in person or one on one, whatever it is, I'm not trying to like entertain people or put on some sort of public like face for others. It's like it's very down to earth and real, and it's like there are different things we can talk about, because especially when it comes to one-on-one conversations, a lot of it's like the right time and place for it. So most of those group settings, you good or bad, you don't necessarily want to bring it up, because you want your players to be as comfortable as possible, and you can very easily just like destroy that in like the matter of like 10 seconds in a Discord call. So it's like you have to be really careful in how you establish like that relationship.
And that's why I think like mental support is so important, because a lot of us, like you said, you can like completely shatter a group's chemistry in a matter of moments if someone brings something up that no one's ready for or no one wants to hear in that particular moment. But the thing is, none of us are professional, psychologists or anything. So we're not those who have a toolbox that's the best, to deal with a lot of these problems. So I think if you're looking for like the most basic, way to upgrade your team is its performance beyond just like, if you're not able to give every single person, full rides or any scholarship, but say your program's willing to give staff, giving a coach, because that removes the team captain from having to do everything and gives that figure that can, again, have a different relationships, like you said. Because again, when you're trying to be, the funny jokester, like entertaining people, like let's say that's your style of leadership or how you come across publicly. Well, let's say you need to have like a harsher conversation with someone, like it's going to be a very like, it can be sometimes it's a personally thing difficult to do, and then your coach can be a nice complement to that, because your coach can oftentimes be that kind of mirror side of your leader, or when one of your leadership figures in that team. So it can be like, okay, your IGL is a very disciplinarian, hardcore, grind till the cows come home kind of person, but then your coach can be a very supportive, like energetic cheerleader type, and that can help boost the morale and help keep that kind of balance going. And having any form of sports psychologist like can just be that resource that's a professional that can actually handle people when they are facing the struggles of competitive life and just school in general, because campus counselors are overworked. Like there's usually a handful
Yeah.
for a huge enormous body of students. So just having that like personal attention to people, especially in competition where you're going to be put under a lot of stress, is so important, and I can't stress it enough.
I guess one of the last things I guess I'll bring up with it is, you look at the basketball teams, whoever, not basketball, sports teams in general, and you'll see all the support they have. And then, like you're saying, the competitive esports teams have like none of it, like really none of it. It's really up to the players to make the teams establish all those different boundaries. And obviously there's people who have experience. There's not that many, because like esports is still new, especially for collegiate scene. But you have players you can learn from, but that's about it. You have like That and maybe like Reddit if you really feel like you need Reddit, because Reddit, I mean, I've learned a lot of cool things from Reddit. So yeah, I don't know where I was trying to go with that, but yeah, no, there's not a lot of resources, but there are people that can help.
Yeah. On a serious note, yeah, there is a lot of great resources online and a lot of interesting podcasts that do happen and a lot of, interesting conversations with quality people. And that's another thing is like just having any random person stand behind you and be a coach or be a psychologist isn't obviously, do your due diligence and vetting and making sure that that person is quality. But I'd hope anyone in those positions that offers themselves up, understands what they're getting themselves into. But the real moral of the story, as Jeremy said, is all your problems can be solved by Reddit, and nothing else is needed. Just post it online. Let random people decide your fate. It's like Twitch plays Pokemon. Just let the internet take the wheel.
Or we need to make r/DePaul Esports Psychology Gaming Help. Longest Reddit title. It's gonna blow up. It's gonna be on the front page. It's gonna be like Wall Street bets. We have 8 million people just talking about life in college in gaming, which is probably gonna go terrible, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, my Uber driver is going to now rather than Wall Street bets, he's going to ask me, what are those DePaul Esports Psychology Gaming Community Reddit threads that he's asked me about.
Yeah, well, we've been here for almost an hour. That was a quick hour, which is...
It is.
Wow.
Are we gonna have to extend this more? We need more talk?
I don't know. We'll talk about that outside the podcast. Yeah. But
exactly.
We're here gonna be every Friday, 4 p.m. It may change. Who knows? What that dog doing? We are doing different things.
We keep you on your toes here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm literally on my toes. Can you see it? I know you can't see me. Just say yes.
I can't. Yes.
Thank you. But 4 p.m. twitch.tv/DePaul Esports. And Matt, would you like to take it away?
And this has been Demon Time.
No way. We'll see you guys later. Bye.